The bank manager pointed at the security guard and ordered him to escort the single father out. All because of $17. Ethan Brooks stood frozen beneath the polished lights of the First National Bank in downtown Chicago, holding a crumpled receipt in one hand and his 8-year-old son's worn backpack in the other. His face was tired, his jacket was faded, and there was a small stain on the sleeve from the breakfast he had hurriedly prepared that morning. Around him, wealthy customers watched as though they were witnessing the removal of a dangerous criminal. What nobody in that bank knew was that Ethan had come there to withdraw $63 million. And within minutes, the manager who had humiliated him would discover exactly how expensive a $17 mistake could become. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness matters more than appearances, that people deserve second chances, and that we should never judge someone by the clothes they wear, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, the person everyone ignores is carrying a story that could change everything. Ethan had never imagined his life would bring him to a bank like First National. 5 years earlier, he had been married, working as a financial analyst in a small investment firm, living in a comfortable apartment, and dreaming about buying a house where his son, Caleb, could have a backyard. Then his wife, Hannah, died suddenly after a long illness, leaving Ethan alone with a 6-year-old boy who still expected his mother to walk through the front door every evening. Ethan had learned how to braid hair badly, pack school lunches, sew a missing button, attend parent-teacher meetings, and hide his tears until Caleb was asleep. He also lost his job. At first, Ethan believed he could rebuild. He took contract work, drove delivery vehicles at night, and eventually found employment as a maintenance assistant in a commercial building. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Every morning, he dropped Caleb at school before going to work. Every evening, he came home exhausted and made whatever dinner he could afford. He had become the kind of father who measured groceries carefully and checked his bank balance before buying a carton of milk. That morning, Caleb had asked for $17. His school was holding a science exhibition, and the students were supposed to contribute toward materials. Ethan had promised to bring the money. But after paying the electricity bill and buying Caleb's prescription, his checking account was short by exactly $17. So Ethan decided to visit the bank. He walked into First National wearing the cleanest clothes he owned: dark jeans, a plain gray shirt, and an old navy jacket. Caleb stood beside him, clutching his backpack and looking at the enormous marble lobby with wide eyes. Ethan approached the customer service desk and politely explained that there was an issue with his account. The employee checked his identification, looked at the screen, and suddenly frowned. A few minutes later, Margaret Caldwell, the branch manager, arrived. Margaret was known throughout the bank for being efficient, intimidating, and obsessed with appearances. She wore an expensive black suit and a gold watch that probably cost more than Ethan's car. She glanced at him, then at Caleb, and asked why he was requesting assistance. Ethan explained the $17 shortage. Margaret examined the account and noticed several recent deposits. Instead of asking questions, she immediately assumed the worst. She accused Ethan of repeatedly causing problems with his account and suggested that he had been attempting to manipulate bank procedures. Ethan remained calm. He explained that he only needed to resolve the discrepancy because his son's school payment was due that afternoon. But Margaret wasn't listening. She demanded additional documentation. Ethan provided everything he had. She continued questioning him in front of other customers until his face became red with embarrassment. Then came the moment that would change the bank forever. Margaret told Ethan that his account privileges were being terminated because the bank could not continue dealing with high-maintenance customers. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. He asked what would happen to the money already in his account. Margaret coldly replied that the remaining balance would be handled according to procedure. Then she told security to remove him. Caleb immediately moved closer to his father. The little boy didn't understand banking regulations. He only understood that adults were staring at his father and that his father looked hurt. As Ethan turned away, Caleb quietly asked whether they were in trouble. Ethan looked down at his son and forced a smile. He told him they weren't in trouble and that everything would be okay. But Margaret made one final mistake. As Ethan reached the exit, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was his attorney. Ethan answered quietly and listened for several seconds. His expression changed. He asked whether the transfer had been finalized. The attorney confirmed that it had. Ethan thanked him and ended the call. Margaret barely noticed. Then Ethan turned around. He walked back toward the customer service desk. The security guard stepped forward, but Ethan calmly explained that he needed to speak with the manager one last time. Margaret sighed and asked what he wanted now. Ethan placed his identification on the counter. Then he placed another document beside it. Margaret glanced at the paperwork without interest. She asked whether he was filing a complaint. Ethan shook his head. He explained that he had originally come to withdraw $17 from his personal account. But after what had happened, he had decided to transfer the entire balance to another institution. Margaret smirked. She asked how much money he believed was in the account. Ethan answered quietly, $63 million. The lobby went silent. Margaret stared at him. The employees behind the desk stopped typing. Even the security guard froze. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Margaret laughed nervously, assuming Ethan was making a desperate joke. But the bank's senior financial officer had been watching the situation from across the lobby. His name was Jonathan Reed, and unlike Margaret, he recognized the account number on Ethan's document. His face went pale. He immediately approached the desk and asked Margaret to step aside. She demanded to know why. Jonathan quietly told her that the customer was not an ordinary account holder. Ethan Brooks had been the beneficiary of a trust established by his late father, a successful technology investor who had passed away months earlier. The trust had remained private during probate. That morning, the final legal restrictions had been removed. The available balance was indeed approximately $63 million, and Ethan had authorization to move every dollar. Margaret's expression changed instantly. The man she had treated like a nuisance suddenly became the most important customer in the building. She apologized, but Ethan didn't smile. He didn't raise his voice either. He simply looked at Caleb. The little boy was still holding his backpack. Ethan explained that he had not come to show off money. He had come because his son needed $17 for a school project. He told Margaret that the money in his account didn't make him better than anyone else. It didn't make his grief disappear. It didn't bring Hannah back. It didn't erase the years when he had worried about rent, food, and medical bills. Then he said something that made the entire lobby uncomfortable. He explained that wealth had taught him something poverty never had. You can always recognize the people who only respect you after discovering what you own. Jonathan immediately apologized on behalf of the bank. Ethan listened. Then he asked for the withdrawal paperwork. Margaret tried desperately to convince him to reconsider. She promised special treatment, private banking services, and even offered to personally manage his account. But Ethan refused. He said he didn't need special treatment. He only wanted ordinary respect. The transfer request was submitted. Within minutes, the bank system processed the first stage of Ethan's $63 million withdrawal. Margaret watched the confirmation appear on the screen. The amount was so large that the number seemed almost unreal. Her career at the branch had been built around protecting wealthy clients. Yet she had nearly driven away one of the largest accounts in the bank because a tired father had asked about $17. But Ethan wasn't finished. He asked to speak with the employees. Everyone gathered around. He told them that he wasn't there to punish them. He knew most of them hadn't treated him badly. He knew they were simply doing their jobs. Then he asked whether the bank had a policy for helping struggling families. Jonathan admitted that it did, but the program was rarely promoted. Ethan asked why. Nobody answered. He then announced that he wanted to establish a community fund using part of his inheritance. The fund would help single parents cover school expenses, emergency medical bills, groceries, and temporary housing. The first donation would be made that very afternoon. But there was one condition. The bank would not control it. A nonprofit organization would manage the fund independently. Ethan said he wanted families to receive help without being humiliated. That sentence broke something inside Jonathan. He admitted that years earlier, his own mother had been a single parent. He remembered her counting coins at the kitchen table and pretending she wasn't hungry so he could eat. He looked at Ethan and quietly thanked him. Then Ethan did something nobody expected. He walked over to Margaret. The manager was standing alone near the desk, her face filled with shame. Ethan told her that he could have demanded her immediate termination. He could have contacted the bank's executives and made one phone call that would have ended her career. But he wasn't going to do it. He said everyone makes mistakes. However, he wanted her to understand that mistakes made from arrogance could destroy people. Margaret began crying. She admitted that she had judged Ethan because of his clothes, his account history, and the way he looked when he walked through the door. She said she had forgotten that every customer was somebody's father, mother, son, daughter, husband, or wife. Ethan accepted her apology, but he didn't take back the transfer. The $63 million was moved. The bank lost one of its largest customers. Yet something unexpected happened afterward. The story spread throughout Chicago. People learned about the father who had been humiliated over $17 and then responded by creating a fund for struggling families. Donations began pouring into Ethan's nonprofit. Teachers sent letters. Single parents sent thank you notes. Children wrote messages in colorful crayons. One little girl wrote that she could finally attend her school field trip because someone had decided that $17 should never determine a child's future. Ethan eventually bought a modest house outside Chicago. Not a mansion, just a warm home with a backyard. Caleb planted sunflowers near the porch because his mother had once told him that sunflowers always looked toward the light. Ethan also kept one thing from that terrible morning: the original $17 receipt. He framed it and placed it above his desk. Not because he wanted to remember the humiliation, because he wanted to remember the lesson. Money can open doors, but kindness determines what happens after you walk through them. Years later, Ethan returned to First National. Margaret no longer managed the branch. She had left banking and was working with a community financial education organization. Jonathan was still there. When Ethan walked into the lobby, nobody rushed toward him because of his wealth. Instead, an elderly janitor recognized him and smiled. The man thanked Ethan because the community fund had helped his granddaughter remain in school after his family suffered a financial crisis. Ethan shook his hand. Caleb, now older, stood beside him. The boy looked around the bank and smiled. Ethan looked at the marble floors, the expensive lights, and the desks where everything had begun. Then he looked at the old receipt in his hand. $17 had once made him feel powerless. But that same $17 had become the beginning of something much bigger. It had reminded an entire institution that people are not bank balances. They are stories. They are struggles. They are families. And sometimes, the person standing quietly in front of you may be carrying more pain, more hope, and more potential than you could ever imagine. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder not to judge others, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories about kindness, courage, second chances, and the unexpected moments that can change a person's life. And before we end, I have one special request for you. Comment, "Kindness is worth more," below if you believe that every person deserves dignity, no matter how much money they have. Because Ethan Brooks walked into that bank needing $17. He walked out without needing anything from them. But he left behind something worth far more than $63 million, a lesson that everyone in that building would remember for the rest of their lives. Never judge a person by what they have in their hands. You never know what they carry in their heart.